name is Sammy Lang. I'm the Outreach and Exhibits Librarian here for the Santa Rosa Junior College Libraries. I'm also the Mahoney Library Gallery Coordinator. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our lecture and exhibit of Memories in the Dust, the Japanese American Experience. I would like to introduce our first guest, Henry Kaku. Henry has been instrumental in organizing this exhibit and especially in bringing the barrack within the gallery to our campus community. So thank you, Henry. Thank you.
Okay, again, my name is Henry Kaku, and I'm here to talk about why I represent the Sonoma County JACL, Japanese American Citizens League, and we do this presentation so that mainly to tell the story of what happened to the Japanese Americans during World War II. And basically to share the story so that we could learn from history so that we don't repeat it again. Unfortunately, it's happening again. Okay, so I'm going to start off by how we identify ourselves. In Japanese, we count, say, ichi, ni, san, shi or yon, and go for 5. So the first generation, that would be my grandparents, my grandfather, grandmother, both on my parents' side, our first generation called Iseis. And so that's how we identify each other. Their children, my parents, born in California, are Niseis. So we have Norma, Alice, and Marie right here that are Niseis. So they would have been alive during World War II and would have been incarcerated. I'm Sansei, 3rd generation, and I was unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, I was not incarcerated, but my brother and sister were. They are Sanseis, and actually both my brother and sister were born while they were incarcerated. My children will be called Yonsei, and then if they ever have children, I hope one day, so their children will be called Gosei. So we have a photo here of Sonoma County because it's going to be instrumental when hopefully if I could get wrapped around to the end of the presentation. The upper left corner is the chicken farmers in Petaluma, and down on the right side is the apple orchard and apple growers. This is a group photo of Germans and Italians and Japanese 1st and 2nd generation people working in the farms. And they developed a very close relationship and a very strong bond, which really was different and unique to the rest of the United States, the West Coast. Okay. So this is my family. This is around 1910. That's my father, the little boy standing there as a young boy, born just outside of Fresno. And that's my family, my parents. Just before I was born, my brother and my sister, who were both incarcerated with my parents. Oh. I forgot I did speak. I took it out. That's okay. Actually, that is also a very important picture. I can't go back on this, but one of them was a picture of Margaret Murakami. Really? Yes. Her parents. And then the 3 men that you saw were her brothers, and the one in the middle is the one that passed away, was killed in action during World War II. He joined the army. So before I start, I'm going to read a little excerpt from this letter from a 12-year-old. And I've been doing this recently because I found this letter to be really moving and really tell the story of what happened to the Japanese Americans. So this is a 12-year-old writing to his friend back home, his neighbor. Dear Hermie, here I am sitting on my army cot in a smelly old horse stall. For Mama, Bud and I have to live for who knows how long. It's pouring rain, the wind's blowing in through all the cracks, and Mama looks like she wants to cry. Then he goes on to say, anyway, now I know how it feels to stand in line at a soup kitchen with hundreds of hungry people. And that cold potato and wiener they gave me sure didn't make me feel much better. I'm still hungry. I gave you my last nickel if you appeared this minute with a big fat hamburger and a bag full of cookies. You know what? It's like being in jail here, not being free to live in your own house. And he continues on to say, me, a gentleman born in California, citizen of the United States of America, stuck behind barbed wires just because I look like the enemy in Japan. And how come you're not here too, with that German blood in your veins and a name like Hermann Schnabel? We're at war with Germany too, aren't we? And with Italy. What about the people and the holy grocers? And he continues to write a few more things. And second to the last sentence, he says, hey, do me a favor, go pet my dog Rascal for me. He's probably wondering why I have to leave him with Mrs. Harper next door. Tell him I'll be back to get him for sure. It wasn't almost 4 years before he was able to see his dog again, if it survived. One of our speakers, Alice, Alice Kashiwaki, yes, had a little dog and she was a young child and she was taken away. And while she was away, her dog passed away. And when she came home, very nice neighbors of hers that took care of their family met her at the train station and gave her a brand new puppy. That's the kind of stuff that happened here in Sonoma County. Oh, shoot. Let me try one. The posters that you saw were in 1906, Senator Fallon running for re-election, and also the other poster was the mayor of San Francisco at the same time running for mayor. And in their slogan, they're saying, keep the Japs and the Koreans away. So way back in 1906, there was lots of Asian hatred. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act that came about in the late 1800s, which excluded the Chinese from coming to America, even though they were originally brought over to help build the rail systems. But then, eventually, the Americans decided to have laws against them. In addition to that, all Asians were not allowed to become U.S. citizens. So even though they had been here for 40, 50, 60 years, were never able to become American citizens. My grandparents and your parents, their parents here, in fact, these three ladies in the front row, were not allowed to become U.S. citizens, even though they had lived here pretty much most of their adult life until 1954? 52. Close. Give or take 2 years. Oh, it's right there. I should read my own writing. The other laws that were against Asians is that they were not allowed to own any land. So, jumping right into Pearl Harbor, as soon as Pearl Harbor was attacked, within days, the FBI rounded up all of the leaders in the West Coast of Japanese descent. Usually the church minister, these are pictures here in Sonoma County. The gentleman in the middle is the minister at the time at the Buddhist church in Enmanchi Buddhist Temple in Sebastopol. The others were local leaders, civic leaders, community-oriented leaders, maybe president of the Japanese American Citizens League or other organizations. So anybody with any prominency in terms of leadership were taken away within days after Pearl Harbor. Whoops, oh shoot. I did get used to this. So here's a picture of the FBI coming into the house. They would knock on the door, go in and start ransacking, going through everything, and taking anything that had Japanese writing on it because they obviously couldn't read it, so they thought it might be eventually used for espionage against the United States government. So they took away bank statements, bank account documents, and so forth. These are the same men who are now incarcerated from the earlier picture. And then, within a few months, there were all these negative hysteria against the Japanese, basically saying oust all Japs in California. And that's in the San Francisco Chronicle. Then there were posters posted all over like this in wherever Japanese Americans were living, and were told they had to evacuate their belongings, pack up their belongings, and go to a particular place to wherever that was nearby. So like here in Santa Rosa or Sonoma County, it might be the Railroad Square in Santa Rosa is where they probably met. So they had an evacuation sale for many of the families. Okay. Oh, and just backing up, those who were asked to leave or who were forced to leave, if you had one blood of Japanese ancestry in you, you were required to go. So even if you were an infant, and let's say your mother was Caucasian or Japanese and your husband or the father was Caucasian, the child would have to leave the mother and be taken away. And I believe in Sonoma, right, there was a woman that same thing, similar thing happened. Because of intermarriage, interracial marriage, the children were taken away and the father, but the mother was not, and was separated, and the child was very young. So at this point, I'm going to read something that my father wrote and read in 1980s when the Congress went around all over the United States asking for people who were incarcerated to speak to the Congressional Committee about their experience and why there should be a reparation and so forth. And so he says, basically he's talking about the fact that he was serving in the military when he was kicked out. He goes, I got on the Greyhound bus headed home in Raleigh. For now I was in an, let's see, I can barely see it. For now I was an enlisted reserve. So they kicked him out of the army and made him enlisted reserve. Upon arrival, I was very surprised that all my friends refused to drive me home. They told me that there's a curfew on and all Japanese ancestors to stay put in their houses. The only choice I had was to walk home 14 miles, which I did, in his military uniform. He continues to say to the Congressional Committee, at this point, I have lost all my capital investments that I had made. First, 40 acres of land under cultivation ready for harvest. And what did I get for it? Nothing. Second, a team of mules. What did I get for it? Nothing. Third, a house. What did I get for it? Nothing. Fourth, automobile. What did I get for this? Nothing. And finally, all my household goods and small incidentals. What did I get for this? Nothing. Please do not ask me what all this amount to in dollar-wise. I shall leave this to your judgment. It is only my property loss, but it also includes frustration, time, physical pressure, and nervous pressure. So this is what happened with most of the people. Over 80% of the Japanese Americans lost everything that they owned, having to be taken away. They could only take with them what they could carry in their hands. And here's a photo of them rounded up into local trucks or wherever, because they couldn't take their vehicle with them, obviously. And then to the train station or the bus depot. And here's a photo of people leaving. So you pretty much read this, 120,000 total of Japanese Americans in the United States were taken away. And 70% or 77% of 77,000 were American citizens born in the United States. And the average age was 17. There's several of us that speak to high schools a lot, and we always tell the high school kids that the majority of the people that were incarcerated were that age, 17 years old. And they ended up their high school years there, some finishing their middle school, and then all their high school there, and they graduated while they were incarcerated. So they lost out on a lot of the social things that the kids would have had, or teenagers would have had. So the blue dots represent what we call the temporary facilities. Majority of them were horse stables, or racetracks and fairgrounds. And like that letter that I wrote the boy, my mother also lived for 8 months with her family in a horse stable. And she said no matter how much they tried to clean, every day while they were there, the smell of the horse stable never went away. And my mom would talk about this pretty much until, as long as I would talk to her and ask her about it, she would always talk about this. It was something that my mom constantly talked about, that and the food that they were served. The red dots are the permanent relocation centers, they call them, but they were basically concentration camps, internment camps, prison camps. And here's a photo of the racetrack. So you can see where the racetrack in the center was, and those buildings are the horse stables. So between those two areas, if you were lucky, I guess you got to sleep in a tent on the horse track. And so you then saw like horse manure. But entire families with all their children and their parents had to be forced to live in these horse stables. So here's another photo of the young girl with her belongings. And this is the photo of the horse stables in the condition that they lived in. This is a natural picture. You can see that it was all muddy during the wintertime, hot. Obviously, there's no insulation, there's no sink, there's no toilets, there's nothing. It's just, you see a horse stall, that's what it was. After living in the temporary centers for between 6 to 8 months, the permanent facilities were built, the internment camps. And those red dots you saw earlier were the permanent camps. So here they were put on the trains and taken over for sometimes 2, 3, 4 days travel time on the train. A lot of little stories that I heard from some of the Niseis who were alive back 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when we went to some of these, they call them reunions, camp reunions. And people would mention things like getting off the train. The first time they would stop for bathroom break, they would get out of the train. And many of the elders the first time did not want to get out because they didn't know what was happening. They were in a desolate area with nothing around, and when they got off the train, on top of the trains were soldiers pointing guns at them. So they were scared stiff, thinking that maybe this is where they're going to get killed. If they had to do the kids and their parents had to go to the bathroom, were not allowed to go to the bathroom behind any. They could not hide behind a tree or behind a rock or anything. If they did, the soldiers would yell at them and say, "Get out. Get away from the tree," or whatever. So again, there's a picture of the 10 internment camps, and there's a picture now of the barracks. The barracks were very similarly built to the one that's right out here in the library here. Basically 2x4 frames with plywood or planks. And maybe if they were lucky, they had tar paper. Eventually, within about second and third year, they got more, sheetrock and things like that. But still, there was no insulation. There was no bathroom. There was no sink. There's no, obviously, kitchen. And to go to the bathroom, you had to go out to another building, whether it was raining or shine, whether it was middle of the night with, several foot of snow or whatever. One of the things that almost everybody that I've talked to, these days who were alive, who were old enough to remember. My brother and sister were too young to remember. My sister was just 3 years old, so she doesn't remember anything. My brother was 6 months old. But those who were old enough, these ladies here will tell you the same thing. One of the things that they remembered most was whatever you had to do, just to go wash your hand or go to the bathroom, you had to stand in line for everything, food and everything, whether it was cold, whether it was blizzard going on outside, whether there was a sandstorm in Arizona where my parents were incarcerated, they had to stand in line just so that they could go to the bathroom. So people would say, "Oh, I would try to wake up 4 in the morning so they could go early," or, go hopefully at other times when it wasn't so crowded. Going back to the barracks were those long barracks, and in each one of the long barracks, 5 families lived in them. And so if you had a room, if you cut this in half, pretty much, and made it long, that would be probably what the barracks looked like. And between each of the families, even though 5 families lived there, there were no walls. So I think, and here's a picture of the tower guards when they went to the internment camps. Here in Sonoma County, most of the people went to a place called Amachi in Colorado. And again, here's pictures of what it looked like. It was desolate. There was nothing around for miles and miles and miles. These are some men trying to go in. So this is a depiction of what it looked like inside the camp. They had to hang sheets and blankets so that between our family and the next family, that's what they did. That was their wall. And then eventually we would hang more sheets of blanket between the parents' room and the kids' room, if they were lucky to do that. And so you could hear everything going on. The fifth family down at the end, you could hear everything that's going on, everything they're talking about. There was no, like I said, any possession or anything. And they were all given army cots. Some of the places when they arrived, some of the nieces told me that they were given a bag, and they found out these were body bags. Fortunately, they weren't used body bags. But they were body bags, basically, and they would just stuff the hay into it and make their mattress. And one lady said it hurt so much that she just took it all out and just laid the blanket on the bag flat over her cot. And the cot is like what you see in that room. That was what they slept in. So again, everything became communal. Taking bath, wash, bathing your children, whatever. So there was no more privacy. And that had to have taken a lot of emotional toll, especially for the elders. For the younger ones, maybe not so much. It wasn't too bad for them, I think. But I know my parents and my grandparents, for them, it was very emotionally difficult. Losing their identity as a parent, they cannot work anymore, they have no money. They were unable to have their family together, sit down and have dinner at the family unit. And you have to imagine this is going on for 3.5 years. And so there were a number of instances where fathers in the Japanese culture, by committing suicide, it shows honor because they felt they were dishonored by not being able to care for their family. So there are a number of cases where Issei parents committed suicide while they were incarcerated. So here's pictures of people standing in line at the lower and up there eating away. For the majority of the kids, if you remember, recall 70% were average age was 17. So there were obviously lots of kids younger than that. For them, it was like going to a summer camp, I think, in many ways. But after a week or two, you think, okay, I want to go home. After a month or two, I still want to go home. And after 3 months, 1 year, 2 years later, they're realizing they're not going to go home. One of the things that is really ironic, the American government, when they did all this, did put into consideration the fact that there were all these kids under, 17 and under. And so they had no school set up. They had no classroom set up. They just had barracks where people were going to sleep in. They had nothing for them. So many of the elder niseis, the younger niseis who had maybe just graduated high school, or maybe there were a handful that graduated college, they became temporary school teachers. The parents, the adults built whatever scrap wood they could find, tables and chairs for the kids, and then they would end up teaching them. Eventually, they sent out a newspaper throughout the United States asking for school teachers, certified school teachers, and many from the Quaker community came into these internment camps and became teachers. So around 1943, the Japanese Americans, the young men, wanted to prove, and many of the parents too, wanted to prove loyalty to the United States. And so they wanted to form or join the army. They couldn't join the regular army because they were Japanese ancestors. So they formed their own unit called the 442nd and combined it with the Hawaiian 100th Battalion. And together they ended up eventually going to Germany. This unit is one of the smallest units in the history of the United States, but it's the most decorated unit in the history of the United States in the military. No other unit of this size, or probably comparable to any other size, have earned more Congressional Medal of Honor, Purple Heart, Bronze Medal, etc. So here are pictures of young men saying goodbye to their parents, who in the background you can see their barracks that they were forced to live in. Then in later 43, they asked 2 loyalty questions, which were very confusing to many of the Isseis whose English was not very good. but even to the Niseis, the second generation, who are in their maybe late teens and early 20s. So the first question, are you willing to serve in the armed forces in the United States on combat duty, wherever ordered? My father was a troublemaker. This is my father in September 1941, taken while he was in the U.S. military. He was stationed in Georgia with the Army Corps of Engineers. His unit was, as soon as Pearl Harbor was attacked, this unit, and this is a photo of this unit, and you guys can come up and see these later. This was this unit, Army Corps of Engineers. They were all deployed to Europe because they were one of the first units to go as soon as America entered the war, because the Army Corps of Engineers are very important. If the Allies are going to go invade Europe, go back to Europe and defeat the Germans, you needed good roads, you needed bridges built, everything. So that their unit was immediately sent out. My father and another gentleman who was of Japanese descent, second generation, was kicked out of the army basically. And it wasn't until almost a year later that he found out that he was on enlisted reserve. And then a few months later, he was then given an honorable discharge. So when he was asked that question, he pretty much said, I'm not responding to that question. If you just look at my history, a year ago, or 2 years ago, I was in your goddamn army. Those are his words when I interviewed him. Okay? I was in your goddamn army, and now you're asking me this stupid question? He wasn't very articulate. But he would just tell him as it was. And he said, I'm not going to answer. You just look at my history and you'll know the answer. So once you answer no to either one of these questions, you were automatically coined as what we call the no-no boys. And there's a little section here about the no-no boys. The second question, someone like my grandparents, and even to everybody else who was over 17 who was asked this question, is this a trick question? Are they trying to weed me out? And if I say yes, then that means I was loyal to Japan, right? And so then maybe this is a trick way of identifying them, so now they're going to do something else with me. If I said no, then I'm a traitor to the United States. But then remember the Issei's, even if they had lived here 50, 60 years, like my wife's great-grandfather, could not become a U.S. citizen. So then if they said yes to this, then they are stateless. They are homeless. They don't have a country to call as their nationality, or not nationality, I guess, citizenship. Then they become people of the world, not of any country. So again, people like a lot of my grandparents' age people, a lot of them answered no to that. They were too old to answer yes to the first one, because they were 60 years old already. But then they became what was called a no-no boys. So there's again a picture of my father. Eventually my father, so let me just back up a little bit here. So then all of these eventually people who answered no to one of the two questions were coined as no-no boys. From all the 10 camps, they took out all the no-no boys and their families, if they wanted to go with them, to Tule Lake. And those who answered yes, yes, in Tule Lake, most of them, about half of them, were taken and sent to other camps, back to the other camps. So it was a big switch going on in late 43. Eventually, Tule Lake had over 20,000 people incarcerated in there. And Poston, Arizona was also where my parents first were incarcerated, had over almost 20,000 people there. And a little story about my family. My parents, my mother had just graduated high school. My father was 25, he was in the military. Going to Poston, they met while they were incarcerated. And because they met, they met and they fell in love and got married while they were incarcerated. And that's where my sister was born, within a year, shortly after. So, and then they were all sent to Tule Lake in Northern California. So about 10,000, or half of who were in Tule Lake were the no-no boys. Well, it was kind of a stupid thing to do because you put all the troublemakers in one spot. And what are they going to do? They're going to talk to each other and say, you know what, that was like, yeah, I agree with you. I don't, And next thing you know, they're protesting more and more. To the point where now the no-no boys were being segregated and put into more secure prison within the prison. First, you had the internment camp with the general population was. Then the no-no boys were there. And then inside there was another barbaric group where the no-no troublemakers were. So that's where my father and my grandfather and my uncles were eventually put in there. So this picture is kind of unique because there were about 100 and little over 100 people, 100 men, were taken out of Tule Lake eventually. The no-no boys, the most severe troublemakers, the most loudest people who were protesting being incarcerated. These are men that were sent to Bismarck, North Dakota, to a POW camp. And actually, someone said, I can't remember where I read it somewhere, they actually had it better going to a POW camp because in the POW camp, you had the Geneva Convention. And so the food they got with the Germans and the Italian prisoners was much better than what they were getting in the camps. Because in the camps, like my mother would talk about, and she hated what she called mutton, lamb. Because in the beginning, that's all they served. Lots of mutton and about that story said cold wieners and whatever. That was their main courses for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So my mother would remember, and when my wife and I would make lamb stew or lamb roast, she goes, "No, you're not going to touch it." Because that recollection of the mutton, if you know old mutton, it stinks like heck. You can cook and cook and cook it, boil it, the smell never goes away. You should try it someday. So the gentleman, I'm going to point here, the gentleman in the fourth to the left standing up is my father. The second row to the first gentleman on the left, I don't know if you can tell, that's my grandfather. And then this first gentleman right here, and this one at the end are my two uncles. So I come from a very loud family. Troublemakers they were. Okay. Then in 1944, the military needed more soldiers. So they decided to go into the prison camps and ask the men who were 18 and over to be drafted. Well, they weren't told, they were required to be drafted. And a number of the men, also for the same reason they didn't join the 442nd, was the same, you took away my rights, and now you want me to serve in the army? You can let go of my parents, my brothers and sisters, and maybe I'll join the army. Okay, let us go back home, and we'll join the army. But these men, obviously that didn't happen, so these men said, I'm not going to be drafted. So then they were sent to Crystal City, another prison camp. And my wife's father was one of the drafted sisters. So this is a picture of the Buddhist church and Manji Temple in Sebastopol. And kind of, well actually, you know what, it's this. A little bit more about my family. So because my family was such a troublemaker, about just under 5,000 at the end of the war, toward the end, early 1946, when the war ended in 45, they were kept in incarceration at Tule Lake and at the POW camps. And at the, I think it was March of 46, I forgot my table. These 5,000 people were sent to Portland, Oregon, and put onto a ship, and they were deported back to Japan. So my mother, my father, my brother and sister lost and their citizenship was taken away. So they were sent to Japan without, and their U.S. citizenship taken away. And so when I was born in 1948, I was born without a country. Then in 1956, we came back. So here in Sonoma County, I was telling you, is really unique. People like Mr. Irish here, teacher at Allen High School, did a lot to help the families that they were coming back. He met them at the bus stop or wherever they were coming into, helped them find housing, temporary housing, went to help them find food, go to grocery shopping, because there were still negative feelings toward the Japanese Americans here. And these are other pictures of some of the people who took care of some of the it's just incredible. There's one story of one gentleman, he came home, in fact, his father, not recently, but passed away, but he went home, went to his bedroom, opened the door, and the jar full of coins that he had left when he was a young boy was still there, still intact. Other families talked about everything that they left in their house was exactly the way it was when they left 3.5 years ago. The neighbors would live in their house or sleep in their house so that it won't get ransacked or things stolen. So these are kind of some of the acts of kindness that Sonoma County did to many of the Japanese Americans. So the majority of the Japanese Americans were able to come home to Sonoma County and relive and get back to their life. Many of the neighbors actually picked their crops for them, apple, whatever they were doing, and sold it after paying for the expenses. They kept them, put the money aside in their bank account for them, so that when they came home, they even had a little bank account. So that was really nice. People like my father, who lost everything and couldn't go back because they were all deported to Japan, had to start over, a whole new life. So these are just some of the things, you can read that. Some of the violations of laws. Anyway, I'm pretty much, let me just go through these slides. So again, we're doing these talks so that we could not repeat what happened here. And I want to end with this little excerpt from Justice Antonio Scalia, who passed away recently, Supreme Court judge. He warned in the 2014 speech to law students in Hawaii that you are kidding yourself if you think the same thing will not happen again. It was wrong, but I would not be surprised to see it happen again in times of war. And right now, with the rhetoric of politicians and so forth, you hear about what's going to happen, what they want to do to the Muslim Americans, to the Muslims in general who are living here, whether they're citizens or not. So, as sent to them, basically, then you know who's. Hold on. I'll be real fast. That was really fast. Actually, too fast. Anyway, yes, Marie.
Henry, your parents did get their citizenship back again, but how did that happen?
Yeah, in 1955, my father and mother hired a lawyer in San Francisco called Mr. Wayne Collins, and he actually helped out almost every Japanese American who was deported, the 5,000 people who were deported. He had to take each one individually and go to the Superior Court, non-district court, to ask for their decision to be reversed. And the Superior Court said, yeah, once you're a U.S. citizen, the government has no right to take it away. Only you could take away your own citizenship. So that's how they were able to regain their citizenship and come back to America. And in front of us, we have a number of, actually, you were interned, right? Yeah, how old were you when you were interned?
About 4 years old.
4 years old. Yeah. And Alice, Marie.
I was a teenager.
She was a teenager, 16, right? How old were you? You were 16, and she was 16 also. And then Marie, you were 6 years old when they were incarcerated. Marie still goes and speaks with us, and so does Jodi here. We go to high schools, community groups like this and wherever. Oh, and Sharon too, I'm sorry. Okay. So there'll be time for question and answer, I believe, later. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I know a lot of us do have questions, so again, we will have time at the end to ask them. Now I would like to invite Lynn Prime, Special Collections Librarian, and Julie Dinkins, Digital Initiatives Manager of Sonoma State University, to come up and talk about their involvement in a project with the California State universities on Japanese Americans in the 20th century.
Hi, I recognize some people here. So pleased to be here and to acknowledge the Japanese American Citizens League and what they've done for Sonoma State University Library. we have a North Bay Ethnic Archive with, I believe, 2 oral histories that were collected by professors at Sonoma State in the 1970s. And we have some photographs that are the federal government photographs of the Camp Amachi in Colorado, to which Sonoma County residents of Japanese American heritage were sent. And that's all we had at Sonoma State University Library in our special collections until Phyllis Taji and Marie Sugiyama and Alice Kashwagi and Jodi, thank you, talked to us about possibly housing copies of Japanese American Citizens League material. And we have been thrilled with the partnership. And because of them, we were able to participate in, I believe it's now 4 grants to help develop a digital exhibit. Some of you may know Densho, which is an official Japanese American digital archive for Japanese American experience. And they've done incredible work. So what we're doing is going with these grants, Museum and Library Studies Services grant, a National Park Service grant, a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. We've been able to participate with CSU repositories, 15 of us all told currently, to digitize material that were loaned to us by the JACL. So for us, it's just been a huge bonus. Students have been really engaged in the project, in the digitization, and then student researchers have been really actively engaged in using the material. So I encourage all of you to come to the library. You can borrow those materials. You can make appointments to have us show you materials that have not yet been digitized, but huge thanks to the JACL. And my coworker, Julie Dinkins, wants to talk to you about some of the details of the project, and you're welcome to ask us questions or bring up issues to us later. Thanks so much.
It's not projecting the website. It's not a big deal if we don't. So the CSU JAD, the California State University Japanese American Digitization Project, is the project that Lynn mentioned and that the 15 CSUs are participating in. And it started with CSU Dominguez Hills. There were four or five CSUs that, participated in the original, received the original grant. And then after that, there were like 9 of us who said, we want to do that too. We all sort of piled on. So now there's, as Lynn said, 15 CSUs. That's SSU's website, and Camp Amachi Digital Collection is where you can actually go and see digital reproductions of images in just our Amachi collection. And then the CSU JAD is their CSU Japanese American. Sometimes they put history in there, sometimes they leave it out. But anyway, you can see all the different CSUs that are participating in it, and they're listed here on the left. And for instance, if you want to see SSUs, a little introductory page. Oops, sorry. Probably getting dizzy. And then the actual archive. There are so many different items in these collections. There's like war relocation authority documents, photos, correspondence, memos, artwork, yearbooks, all kinds of legal documents, all sorts of stuff. And they're all available here on the CSU JAD website. I printed up just the web pages. If anybody's interested, they want to visit later, they don't want to try and scroll down the URL, just pick them up here on the left side of the page. The JACL has been instrumental in this project. We have digitized our first collection of items we put up were letters from between the Itos and the Perrys, and they were paramount in that. They provided us with those items, which we digitized and put up so you can read about their correspondence. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn and Julie. I would now like to invite Abdi and Ogo Shew of the Sonoma State Anthropological Studies Center.
Hi, so like Sammy said, my name is Dana. I'm the oral historian and archaeologist over at the Anthropological Studies Center, it's easier to say ASC, over at Sonoma State University. And I'm also involved in a project that is looking to digitize and preserve and share and continue education about this, this shared history of ours that we need to continue to tell people about. Just a real quick personal background, I've been working and doing research with the Machi since 2007 about. I got my master's thesis, or I did my master's thesis on the archaeology of women and their experience at Amachi in Colorado. And half of my thesis had to do with, or dealt with, oral histories and interviewing people who were there. And so it was kind of a life-changing thing for me, and I've been lucky to be able to continue that research at Sonoma State and at the ASC. And so the project that I'm currently involved in, it's called the Amachi, oh, you know what, let me put it on the thing. It's called the Amachi Digitization Project. Should I just close this? Oh, we'll close that too. Okay. Amachi Digitization Project. You can see here. Yeah. There it is. You know, that our goal is, like I said, to preserve and share and continue educating through digitization. Basically bring this preservation into the 21st century and making it even more accessible to future generations. The project actually started because we were interested in the silk screen shop. And so the Amachi actually had the only successful silk screen shop of all of those 10 relocation centers that Henry showed you. And the ironic thing is that they started because the Navy, the US Navy, needed a bunch of posters printed. So, right, so they had the camps do it for them. Well, the advantage of actually having this shop in camp is that the incarcerees were also able to use this equipment and make things for their own lives. And so there were things like church programs and graduation programs and dance invitations and like all sorts of things that really reflect daily life were printed there. And they're this really great record of life there. But the other thing that they represent really well is the creativity and artistic expression that happened even behind barbed wires. And so this was sort of something we wanted to focus on, and we knew that there were a lot of people out there that still had a lot of these objects and materials in their collection, and we wanted to bring those out, and we want to be able to digitize those things and save them and share them. So I was able to actually get a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to work on basically doing that, just that, but also expanding it to other things, not just the silkscreen stuff, but like photographs and basically all the stuff that Henry's got laid out here for you, other objects. And so what we're doing is we're working to photograph or scan those things, and we're gonna take those collections and add them to the Sonoma State collection, Den show, and other repositories so that they can be added to that as well. We just had a digitization event, and the JACL has also been extremely supportive, and we could not do this without them as well. And they helped us host a digitization event a few weeks ago. Here's some photos of it. There it is. And so we had, in that day, we had close to 200 items were scanned or photographed. So we've got a lot. I just did a second sort of smaller private digitization event last weekend, and we've added probably almost another 100 pieces. So here's some examples of some of the things that we're getting. The carvings, I don't know, I think you did one? Okay, one of those is yours, yeah. And then here's an example of some of the silkscreen art. That one on the left is one of my favorites, and we hadn't seen that before, and it walked in that day, and I'm, oh my goodness. So it's things like this that are coming out of the woodwork now, and I think that's great. The second part of the project actually is going to involve an exhibit at the Sonoma State Library Art Gallery. That'll happen this fall, and what we'll be doing is showcasing a lot of these objects and prints and things like this, and we'll be really treating it like art and using this art to tell us what their life was like. So I don't have any promotional materials for that yet, but I do have small flyers just about the project, so feel free to pick one of those up. Contact me if you'd like to be on a mailing list to get information about the exhibit, or if you know anybody that may have items that they would like digitized. We'd be happy to continue collecting throughout this project. So thank you.
Approximately when is this going to happen?
So it should be up at the beginning of the fall semester at Sonoma State, which I believe is something like August 20. Third week in August, it should go up, and it's scheduled right now to stay up throughout the semester. So it'll stay up from the end of August through probably mid-December, is what I'm thinking. Yeah. And I'll have more details on the exact dates and hopefully an opening reception later. So please contact me if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I would now like to invite up Jodi Hottel to read to us a poem from her book titled Hard Mountain. So which one? Oh, yeah, sure.
Just have to find it first. So, I'm a poet, and my mother was incarcerated at Hart Mountain at age 16, and she was a sophomore in high school. And this poem is not directly related to her experience, but an imagining, because when the camps were closed, by then, a lot of the younger people had gone off to jobs, or the military, or to colleges. They were sponsored often by church groups, especially the Quakers. And so the people who were left behind with nowhere to return to or go were the elderly people, older people, the Issei, and also, the very young children. So this is an imagining of what it would be like to be forced out of your barrack at the end. It's called Sweeping. Our battered suitcases stand by the door, but they will have to wait while I sweep the desert dust one last time. 3 years we've lived behind barbed wire. Now, Papa and I are being forced out. Too old for farming, no home to go back to. Our children already gone. Sam to war in Europe. A college in Chicago for May. I pause in the doorway of the barrack, our only shelter from the bitter winds, searing heat. No need for a last look at Hart Mountain. It will never be far enough away that I can't see it. I shove the broom hard into empty corners, shaping neat piles of sand. Papa chides, "Why clean?" But I don't listen. Whoever comes to demolish these empty walls will see. We Japanese kept our homes clean.
Thank you so much, Jodi. If our speakers would mind coming up, we now have time for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll repeat it back into the mic so everyone can hear.
Just like in schools. Yes, question.
So you mentioned that the fathers in the family, or men in the household, were asked to answer those two questions. What about women? The adult?
It was actually all adults, men and women, 17 and over, were required to answer those two questions. And these guys, yes, you had a question?
You said 5,000 were sent back to Japan.
Yes.
So of those that wanted to come back, was the decision uniform that anyone could come back to the U.S. if they wanted to? Or was there any other?
Once they were able to regain their U.S. citizenship, all they had to do, like my parents did, because they wanted to come home, was to go to the U.S. consulate in Japan and get their passport, and then they just had to gather their money and hop on another ship.
Was there, I guess my question specifically is, did you know of, were there any exceptions to,
That stayed back in Japan?
not willingly, but attempted to come back to the U.S., but for whatever reasons, the U.S. government
Or not?
decided that they would not be able to?
No, not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, basically the question was there anybody that wanted to come back who were not allowed to come back? And the answer is, I don't think there were any. You have to understand, of the 120,000 that were incarcerated during the war, there was not one case of espionage, there was not one case of any kind of action against the government. So, no one was that much of a troublemaker, like, even though they were the no-no boys.
You mentioned earlier in your speech about how no other Axis powers were represented in any camps. What was that? What about the POW campus? Was there?
Those Germans and Italians were prisoners of war
Where those
from the European front,
Okay.
not from because they lived here.
Do you know of any cases of any
Germans.
Italian or German people here being espionage?
Yeah, there were a handful throughout the United States, mostly from East Coast and maybe even from the West Coast, of Germans and Italian descent who were taken away. They must have had more trouble because, or potential of being maybe doing acts against the United States. So, but there were a few. There were also a fairly nice sized number from Hawaii that were incarcerated. They could not take everybody that was 1/8 blood in Hawaii because if they did, there'd be no one left in the state of Hawaii.
You asked the question, why was it just Japanese people? Was it because maybe that because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it was from Japan?
No, it was,
Or can you speculate on an answer for that?
sure, it was racism.
Sure.
I mean, as I mentioned, there was anti-Asian sentiment way back in the 1800s. They didn't want any Japanese or Chinese immigrants from Japan or China here anymore. So there was anti-Japanese, anti-Chinese sentiment all over. And then the fact that, if you look around, I think you can point out every one of us who are Asian looking, right? And then you all have to ask, are you Chinese or Japanese? And the Chinese wore signs, they're not Chinese. So they weren't taken away. But then the FBI knew every one of the families.
And the other thing is, because of the immigration, the way the immigration pattern was, Japanese were allowed to come in because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And all of a sudden they found out when they were letting the Chinese in that there were no workers, and they had all these workers who were of Japanese ancestry in Hawaii. Then they started letting the Japanese in, and they had not had time to intermarry, because if they had intermarried, it would be hard to tell who was Japanese because of the features would change as the generations changed. And the Italians and the Germans had been here for many years, and they had intermarried. And so it was difficult to identify them. And because of the recent immigration of the Japanese, they had not intermarried, so it was really easy to identify them.
Jodi, you were saying.
Well, I was just going to respond to that also. I'm Italian, and my family was all Italian. And my dad grew up in what's Niles Canyon, like Fremont area, and all of his Japanese friends disappeared. And he said directly, they just can't pick me out in the crowd, but I'm the enemy too. And he went to camp voluntarily. But, clearly racism in, the way somebody looked, that was the deciding factor.
I'm sorry?
We have time for one more question.
Okay, I think you should.
Mine is actually not a question. When I was at Stanford as an undergraduate, I was in political science, and I wrote a thesis on the tensions between the parents and the children
Yes.
and the teenagers, which were exacerbated by the fact that they were crammed in there together, and they had very different visions
Mm-hmm.
of what the future might be. And there were lots of people still alive at the time. So I hope I can find that paper. It might be useful because I did a lot of
That
interviews
would be.
with people. And
One of the things
it really reminded me of I learned about tensions between everybody in the generations, teenagers and all their parents. Was quite similar actually, but exacerbated under those terrible circumstances.
I think one of the things that, as I look back, what we did do is really interview the Niseis and the Iseis when they were alive on the emotional impact, of what happened to them. But I know, like my wife's mother, if you talk to her, she just clamps up.
That's what I was wondering about you. When did your knowledge?
As long as I can remember.
Okay, so your parents.
Because my parents were very vocal.
Yeah.
Because my father was angry. He died going to the grave angry at 95 of what happened to him. So he was rare. My mother was pretty rare too in that they spoke up. So oftentimes during dinner time, when we're having dinner, if the subject came up, you couldn't stop them.
I will say that is much more rare.
Yes,
Yeah,
very
a lot
rare.
of Japanese families, that Issei, especially that Issei generation that Henry talked about, they didn't want to talk about it anymore. They didn't want to associate with it. It was something, there was actually, even though it was no fault of their own, there was a lot of shame involved. And so that wasn't brought up. And it, and a little bit with the Nisei too, and it was actually the Sansei that helped bring a lot of this to light and helped get redress going and helped, educate the public about it.
I don't want to stop us. I know there are more questions, but our lecture time is over for right now. If you have more questions, please do join us in the gallery. We have an opening reception for the exhibit from 5 to 6 of our speakers and volunteers will be around for a little while to answer additional questions. If you are a student who needs a slip saying that you were in attendance, please come and find me. I will be in the gallery afterwards. Thank you so much for coming.